Welcome to Sherlock Mysteries, where every case takes you deeper into suspense, secrets, and thrilling investigations inspired by the world of detectives. If you love solving puzzles and uncovering hidden truths, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's start the story. It began at precisely 10 minutes past 9. With a scream that slashed through the silky stillness of the drawing room like a knife through silk. Before then, there had been laughter, polished laughter, controlled, genteel, the type of laughter that occurs over champagne flutes held slightly too high, with eyes flicking nervously to see who else is laughing and who is not. And suddenly, nothing. The laughs ceased. The celebration was in full flow by that point. Lady Tremain's 72nd birthday party was not subtle. It was an event. The wide doors to her Georgian country house, Ashcroft Vale, had been thrown open to titled cousins, forgotten schoolmates, one or two politicians, and the kind of theatrical acquaintances who always seem to appear on the outside of high society, without anyone knowing how they arrived. In the grand hall, a string quartet performed beneath a display of dried hydrangeas, and the scent of lavender wafted through the air from somewhere unseen. Mr. Gowrie, the butler, had just passed the cognac for the third time when a scream rang out from the morning chamber. Miss Iris Grantham, 32, nervy, single, and forever pale, had discovered the body. She had been looking for her stole, or so she claimed afterwards, but her eyes were crimson and wild when they discovered her crouching alongside the dead. The body belonged to Frederick "Freddie" Delaford, Lady Tremain's nephew, and, some believe, her favoured heir. He was stretched abnormally on the carpet in front of the fireplace, his head at an angle no living man could sustain. One hand was curled beneath him, as if he were grasping for something. A tumbler of brandy had spilt near the hearth, soaking into the border of the bearskin rug. The poker from the fireplace lay beside him, smeared and dark. I think he's dead," Iris said quietly. Then the laughter ceased for good. The local police took nearly 20 minutes to arrive from Little Wendham. They carried with them the serious officiousness of a rural force dealing with gentry and violence. Superintendent Greaves was a barrel-chested man with red cheeks and a stammer that increased when approached by ladies of a specific tone. Lady Tremain, seated rigidly on a striped settee with her lips drawn in an ashen line, spoke very little. She had not spoken since the body was discovered. The home visitors were gathered in the grand hall beneath the watchful eyes of oil portraits, each of which depicted an unsmiling ancestor of the Tremain line, with a hawk's beak nose and a judgmental expression. The questions were preliminary and superficial. Who had seen Mr. Delaford last? Had he spoken with anyone that evening? Was anyone missing? "I heard raised voices," said Mr. Callum Sweeney, a rotund and balding playwright with horn-rimmed glasses, who had been invited to be Lady Tremain's diverting companion from the theatre world. "From the morning room, right before Iris screamed. But I assumed it was one of those upper-crust disagreements that always seem fatal, but end in port." "I saw him with Lady Tremain not an hour ago," said Mrs. Eugenia Lovell, the widow of a baronet and a woman of formidable bone structure. She was furious. He laughed in her face. This was repeated, murmured, analysed. People were beginning to look around with suspicion, with the sudden realization that they had not merely been at a party, but at the scene of a murder. And then someone asked, quietly, carefully, whether they should send for someone more. Capable. Superintendent Greaves had bristled until Lord Pimworth, a stern figure with a military moustache and a title that required no explanation, coughed politely and said, "I believe what Mrs. Lovell means is someone who might provide clarity. From London, perhaps." There was a pause, and then, as if the very air shifted, someone said his name, Hercule Poirot. The name moved like a whisper through the group, from one stiff collar to another, across the velvet gowns and raised brows. Several guests nodded, others exchanged glances. The foreigner, the one with the little moustache and the terrifying eyes. The one who had once solved a crime at a Venetian opera house without rising from his seat. "Do you think he would come?" Iris whispered. Her voice sounded hopeful, but her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve. "It's so far, and he will come," said Lady Tremaine at last, her voice low and brittle like cracked porcelain, "because I will send for him myself." 2 mornings later, a sleek black motor car rolled through the frost-lined gates of Ashcroft Vale. It was a crisp November day, and the wind off the downs carried the scent of wood smoke. The house stood prim and silent under a sky the colour of pewter, its windows glinting like hard eyes. The figure that emerged from the car was not tall, but he was unmistakable. Immaculately dressed in dove grey, with a perfectly tied cravat, gloves so clean they might have been stitched from snow, and a moustache so precise it might have been drawn with a ruler. He walked up the steps of Ashcroft Vale with the calm assurance of a man who knew he was expected and would not be kept waiting. Superintendent Greaves met him at the door with a constipated expression and extended a hand Poirot did not take. "I trust you had a pleasant journey, Mr. Poirot," Greaves said gruffly. "Though I should make it clear we have our own investigation." Poirot held up one finger delicately. "Pardon, Monsieur le Superintendent," he said, "but I come not to replace, only to see, to listen, to observe. If I may." Greaves bristled again but stepped aside. Poirot entered the house as one might enter a theatre. He paused, glanced up at the corniced ceilings, at the chandelier, at the marble bust of Lord Tremaine II near the staircase. "Ah," he murmured, "the architecture of legacy. It weighs upon the shoulders, does it not?" Lady Tremaine received him in the library, where the curtains had been half drawn and the fire crackled low in the grate. She had not changed from her mourning black. Her hands rested on a silver-tipped cane, though Poirot noted she did not lean on it once. "I want the truth," she said simply. "Even if I won't like it." Poirot bowed deeply. "Madame, I do not deal in truths you may like or not like. I deal only in facts, little ones, like the cracked brandy glass near your nephew's hand, or the scuff mark upon the bearskin rug, or the faint smell of something bitter under the scent of lavender." Lady Tremaine blinked. Poirot smiled gently and his voice softened. "I ask only this, madame, let me speak to them. All of them, one by one. And then, when the laughter stopped, perhaps we shall learn why." He turned to the fire, warming his hands, because it is always after the laughter fades that the truth begins to speak. Poirot took the first day with the patience of a man rearranging chess pieces before the opening move. He was neither hurried nor idle. His presence at Ashcroft Vale created a ripple that passed through the guests, some too curious, some too quiet, and a few too composed for his liking. Lady Tremaine had arranged for the household to remain on the estate at least until Poirot completed his inquiries. She had given this order without raising her voice. Her manner had the effect of a judge handing down sentence in a courtroom, final, cold, and absolute. By mid-morning, Poirot had been relocated to a corner room overlooking the frost-bitten garden walks. It had previously been a conservatory, and the high glass ceiling allowed him to see both the sky and suspicion. He positioned his chair precisely and motioned for Hastings, who had joined him from London on short notice, to take the armchair opposite. "A most curious setting, Hastings," Poirot remarked thoughtfully, one hand caressing the edge of his moustache. "A celebration, a death, and a gathering of individuals with secrets under their silks and velvet." Hastings looked down at the tiny notebook lying on his knee. "You're convinced it wasn't an accident, then?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "My dearest friend, men do not smash their heads with pokers and then carefully pour their brandy for atmosphere. No, no. Our Mr. Delaford was helped into eternity. They began their investigation in the study. Superintendent Greaves had grudgingly given up management of the interviews, but he insisted on staying close by, arms folded and moustache twitching like a watchdog, rendered superfluous by a mechanical bell. First came Mrs. Eugenia Lovell, statuesque, in black lace and absolutely unrepentant. She sat down with a solid rustle of cloth and offered Poirot an exquisite yet condescending smile. "I knew Freddie all his life," she added, carefully crossing her legs. "He was charming, infuriating, and acutely aware of his impact on women. I'm amazed nobody had done it sooner." Poirot clenched his fingers. "You create vivid portraits, madame. Tell me, did he have any enemies?" Not official. He was the type of man who gathered adversaries like dust, not on purpose but through negligence. He took out loans, gambled, and made empty promises. Lady. Tremaine adored him, but I doubt she was fully aware of his behavior. And did you? Poirot asked. She tilted her chin. I knew enough. Last summer, I witnessed him grab a diamond brooch from her dressing table. He stated he was getting it. Cleaned, but I think he pawned it. Poirot offered a slight nod. And did you confront him? Certainly not. What good could it have done? He'd have grinned, said something witty, and the brooch would still be missing. When she departed, Hastings leant forwards. She's cool as a cucumber, Poirot. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yes, mon ami, however, the cucumber, not the soup spoon, conceals the knife. Mr. Callum Sweeney was the next to arrive, dressed in a velvet jacket that appeared somewhat too theatrical for daylight. He talked in flawless, scripted phrases, pausing intermittently as if waiting for applause. Freddie. Oh, darling boy, he radiated wickedness, didn't he? The type of man who always appears to be about to get away with something. You heard voices the night he died? Poirot inquired, softly directing the act. Yes, yes, loud, male voices. I assumed it was he and Miles Pimworth. They had spoken before. Something about a failed joint investment. Or perhaps a woman. Freddie was quite indiscriminate. Did you see anyone enter the morning room? No. But I saw Lady Tremaine leave earlier, looking positively thunderous. And where were you when the scream came? Hallway. To be completely honest, I'm waiting for the loo. I heard the scream and ran towards it with, I think, heroic impulses. Poirot did not smile. And did you touch anything in the room? Sweeney blinked, taken aback. No, I'm not that type of fool. Iris was already on the floor besides him, crying, I believe. Or possibly in shock. Hastings wrote the comment in the margin of his page. Poirot simply said, Merci, Lady Iris Grantham. Was the next to enter. Her posture folded inward as if the weight of the house was pressing down on her bones. She held a moist handkerchief from the previous night and rejected tea when offered. I didn't know he was in there, she said quietly. I swear it. I had forgotten my stole, and the morning room was empty before... Poirot tilted his head. Before you discovered the body, sure. But, Miss Grantham, forgive me. You were once engaged to Mr. Delaford, weren't you? She blushed. Briefly. This was a mistake. He had this way of making you feel chosen. And then suddenly discarded. But you remained in contact? No. He attempted to renew things once at the theatre. I ignored him. But Lady Tremaine still invited me, and well, one doesn't turn her down. Poirot halted. You didn't say anything when you entered the room. Not a word to him. I was startled. He did not move. I saw the blood and screamed. Poirot gently interrupted. You yelled after you saw the blood, not upon viewing the body. She paused. Superintendent Greaves shifted behind them and scribbled furiously. Poirot's voice remained calm. It is a minor issue, mademoiselle, but little details are frequently the most telling. She exited, shaken. Poirot stood by the fireplace and regarded the poker laying on the low table. It had been wiped, albeit imperfectly. There was no indication of fingerprints, gloved hands perhaps, yet something about its posture still bothered him. Someone arranged this, he mumbled, half to himself. Deliberately, but not with skill. The positioning is intended to appear sloppy. It is not the act of wrath, no, it is the presentation of rage. Lord Miles Pimworth, who arrived next, was hard, tanned, and tight-lipped. His military bearing made the drawing-room appear smaller. I was not fond of Delaford, he said. I will not pretend. You quarrelled? Poirot asked. We exchanged words. Financial. I don't see how this is significant. He owed me money, definitely. But so do many men. You did not threaten him. No. But I warned him that I would not prolong the loan for another day. Poirot tapped his finger on the side table. And did you intend to speak to him that night? I had. Shortly before dinner, I informed him quite clearly that my patience had run out. And after, I went inside the smoking lounge. I was alone. If you are looking for an alibi, I do not have one. Poirot tilted his head. What I am after, milord, is not alibis, it is understanding. Pimworth grunted. You will not find understanding in that man. He was a parasite wearing silk slippers, Poirot. And Hastings returned to their conservatory retreat after dusk. Outside, the sun was sinking, illuminating the frost-tipped hedges. Poirot hadn't yet spoken. His hands were templed, and his attention was locked on one area in the room. Finally, he remarked, "They all lie, Hastings, but not all with the same intentions." Hastings looked up. "So who do you believe?" Poirot breathed quietly. "It is not a question of belief. Not yet. I observe. I listen. And I await the contradiction. It will come. Someone. Hastings. Someone." Placed that poker with a dramatic hand and poured a brandy he was never supposed to consume. There was a pause. When the laughter stopped, mon ami, I don't suppose it was a surprise. The stillness was too lengthy, too deliberate. Poirot closed his eyes and waited for the truth to whisper. The wind had picked up overnight, screaming quietly at Ashcroft Vale's high windows, as if the old house itself had been shaken by what had occurred within its walls. Poirot arose early. He had spent the most of the previous evening reflecting, not pacing since he did not believe in restlessness, but sitting completely still, with his fingertips squeezed together and his mind twisting inward like the coiled spring of a beautiful watch. He asked for no breakfast, just a little pot of dark coffee which the housekeeper delivered with mute deference. Poirot sipped it gently by the fire in the study, going over each interview. Hastings arrived shortly later, looking slightly rumpled and rather too big for the narrow seat he occupied. "They all have something to hide," Hastings concluded, flipping back through his notes. "But nothing matches up. The lady who witnessed, him steal, the writer who overheard a confrontation, and the girl who used to be in love with him, all of them have reasons to despise Delaford, but none of them scream killer." "Non, non, mon ami," Poirot replied gently. "That's because you're paying attention to what they say. You must also listen to what they don't say. The silences are louder. Miss Grantham didn't say she was alone, but she didn't mention who else was nearby. Lord Pimworth expressed his displeasure publicly, but made no defense of his actions. Mrs. Lovell, on the other hand, observes everything but pretends as if she isn't involved. Curious." Hastings frowned. "You think she knows more than she admits?" Poirot did not respond quickly. He rose and approached the window. "Do you recall, Hastings, what she said about the brooch? That he took it and lied about having it cleaned." "Yes, but the brooch belonged to Lady Tremaine. Wouldn't she have noticed it missing first? Yet it is Mrs. Lovell who tells the story." "Why?" Hastings blinked. "Because she saw him do it?" Poirot turned. "Perhaps. Perhaps she simply claims to have seen it in order to poison his memory, to remind everyone that he was unworthy. Do you see? She casts a vast net with words, keeping her hands clean." There was a knock at the door. Gowrie, the butler, entered, holding a small silver tray containing a single envelope. "Please forgive the intrusion, sir. This was delivered by hand." The footman stated that it was shoved under the side door. Poirot handled it cautiously. The envelope was unmarked, but the calligraphy inside was sharp, slanted, definitely upper class. He wasn't supposed to die that night. She was. Inquire about the envelope that was torched. Ask the girl. She witnessed more than she acknowledges. No signature. There's no fragrance, no flourishes. Poirot read it once or twice. His expression didn't change. He placed it into his breast pocket. "Merci, Gowrie. That's all." When they were alone, Hastings leant forwards. "A letter." Poirot raised a hand. "Later. For now, let us call on Miss Grantham again." With new eyes, they discovered her in the east corridor, seated behind a painting of Lady Tremaine's great-grandmother, whose painted eyes looked at Poirot with disapproval. Iris was holding a small book of verse, open but obviously unread. She shivered at their approach. I already said everything I know." Poirot smiled kindly and sat beside her without asking permission. "Mademoiselle, you're troubled, that is evident. But I believe your worry is not of guilt but of recollection. Something you saw but didn't understand." She paused. Maybe. I am not sure. You entered the room for your steal, correct? Was there anyone in the corridor before you opened the door?" She blinked. "No, I do not think so." I was not looking. I was thinking about what Mrs. Lovell said. At dinner. About my never marrying. Poirot nodded compassionately. Oh, that woman, sharp as broken glass. So you opened the door. You noticed Mr. Delaford on the ground. Have you seen the fire? Yes, it was low, glowing as if it had been banked. Was it hot, mademoiselle? Was there smoke? I do not remember. I just screamed. Forgive me. One last question. Did you observe anything else before screaming? Even something small? A scent, perhaps? She gazed down at her hands. There was something burnt. Like paper. A mild odor. But I didn't think much of it. Poirot's eyes glittered. Merci, mademoiselle, that's all. You have helped greatly. When they were alone again, Hastings said, So someone burned something in the fire. Poirot nodded. Yes. An envelope, perhaps. And she detected the odor, but not the source. Which means the burning was nearly complete, calculated, not in a panic. And they knew who had written the letter. They continued down the corridor, entering the house's lesser-used wing. The air felt cooler here, and the hush was deeper. Poirot paused before a door. This, he added, was Mr. Delaford's room, no? Hastings examined the map of the house. Yes. Right wing, second from the corner. They entered. The room was too neat. Not a single piece of clothes was out of place. The bed was made. The fire was inactive. Poirot moved to the writing desk. He examined the blotter closely. Next, the wastepaper basket, several torn pages. One showed a tiny outline of a list. Lady Tremaine Pimworth, 2000 Grantham letter. Lovell, unknown. Poirot studied the names. He was keeping track. A list of leverage, perhaps, or debts. Emotional and economical. He opened a drawer. Inside there was only one little silver cufflink. The initial engraved on it was P, not D. Pimworth, Hastings answered. Possibly, but why just one? And why in Delaford's drawer? They departed the room without touching anything else. As they turned toward the main stair, they almost collided with Lady Tremaine. She was walking without a cane, her eyes alert. You've been in his room? Poirot tilted his head. Indeed, madame. You think one of us did it. I think, Poirot replied thoughtfully, that someone here had a reason to halt your nephew. Perhaps, madame, to protect you. She narrowed her eyes. I don't need protection. I need the truth. Poirot bowed slightly. Then I'll give it to you. But the truth, madame, is often a bitter wine. She said nothing, only turned and went away with beautiful, arrogant grace. Later that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings returned to the conservatory, where the cold light had faded and the wind outside murmured rather than howled. He arranged his notes, the anonymous letter, and the torn page from the wastepaper basket. Observe, Hastings, we have a man named Delaford who collects secrets. He exploits affection, money, influence. He is charming, but not loved. Each of these guests stood to lose something if he chose to expose them. But what did he know that prompted someone to act now? Hastings stared at the list. Maybe he was going to reveal something. Poirot tapped the page. Or someone. The letter reads, She was meant to die. You think someone tried to kill Lady Tremaine? Or Miss Grantham? Or even Mrs. Lovell? We don't know. However, the envelope was burned and its contents destroyed, possibly to conceal a truth that could have ruined someone. And yet, he paused, there is one of them who has said virtually nothing. The butler, Gowrie. Hastings blinked. You think the butler did it? Poirot raised a finger. Non. But the butler sees. The butler hears. The butler delivers letters and finds the ones not meant to be found. He turned toward the fire. The laughter stopped Hastings not because someone was amused, but because someone knew they were finally cornered. He reached for the poker, held it up and examined it again. And when one fears the truth, one begins to play at violence, not with rage, but with calculation. Poirot sat in silence as the final embers of the fire in the conservatory glowed, softly behind him, his gaze resting not on the poker he had examined moments earlier, but on the far wall where a thin crack in the panelling stretched like a subtle fracture in a painting. Hastings beside him leafed again through his notebook, occasionally glancing up in the hope that Poirot might speak, might confirm that all these fragments were beginning to cohere. But Poirot's silence was not idle. It was a silence of deep, internal rhythm of precise and deliberate thinking, where every gesture, every pause in speech, every omitted detail in a suspect's answer was placed delicately into his mental arrangement of the case. When he finally spoke, it was with the confidence of one who had not yet solved the puzzle, but knew where the corner pieces belonged. "There is something about the poker, Hastings," he said. "Not what it is, but where it is. Its placement, its symmetry. Someone arranged it carefully, not as a murder weapon casually dropped in panic, but as a message, a theatre prop, if you like." Hastings leaned forwards. "You mean someone staged the scene?" "Oui, that is exactly what I mean. And such a person must know not only how to deceive with physical detail, but also how the mind interprets it. That limits us." "To whom?" Poirot did not answer. Instead, he stood briskly and tugged at his waistcoat. "Come. It is time to revisit our theatre man, Mr. Sweeney." They found Callum Sweeney in the West Lounge, reclining in a faded armchair, near the window, his gaze distant as he watched the frost shimmer on the glass panes. A book of Chekhov's plays lay open in his lap, though the spine had not been creased. He greeted them with a tired, ironic smile. "Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings, come to ask whether the dramatist has committed real drama." Poirot did not smile in return. "You were once a set designer before you wrote for the stage, were you not, monsieur?" "Briefly. Many years ago. I made my debut as a playwright at the Lyceum only after failing spectacularly at scenery." "Why?" Poirot tilted his head. "Because the scene in the morning room had flair, composition, a body, angled just so. A poker placed not in haste but with visual balance. Brandy spilled not far from the hearth, but close enough to evoke intimacy like a stage direction. You recognize the image, no?" Sweeney's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained light. "Are you suggesting I dressed the set?" Poirot's voice did not rise. "I am suggesting that you see what others do not. The audience sees the play, the playwright sees the wires, the mood, the shape of things." Sweeney looked out the window again. "He was always playing a part, Delaford. Always charming, always saying the perfect thing just a moment too soon. He was exhausting. You said you heard a quarrel, male voices. Were you sure of that?" "I thought so." "Could it have been a rehearsal?" Poirot asked. "A performance between two people in private, not meant to be overheard?" Sweeney's fingers tapped the edge of his book. "That's a theatrical trick, too. You raise your voice not for your scene partner, but for the audience." Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then, almost gently, "Did you speak to him?" "That evening?" Sweeney hesitated. "No, not directly." "Did he approach you?" Again the pause, slight but telling. "We made eye contact in the hallway before dinner. He smiled, smugly, like he knew something." "Did he?" Sweeney's voice dropped. "He said he had a script, a little play he was drafting. He told me I was going to love it. And then—" He winked. Poirot straightened. "And did he show you this script?" "No. I thought he was mocking me." "Did anyone else know about it?" "Possibly Iris. They were on and off. She always forgave him when he turned on the charm. Or Lady Tremaine, she knew everything in the end." Poirot stepped away. "Merci, monsieur." They left Sweeney alone with his Chekhov and his guilt, whether genuine or borrowed. In the hallway, Hastings frowned. "He's hiding something. But what? If he didn't kill Delaford—" "Non, Hastings," Poirot interrupted. "We are not asking the right question yet. We are so eager to uncover the killer, we have forgotten to ask what was Freddie Delaford about to do. He had a list. He hinted at a play. He confronted at least one person in private. Something was coming. And that, mon ami, is what cost him his life." Downstairs, Poirot asked for the butler. Gowrie appeared moments later, as always neat, neutral, and so discreet he seemed to absorb sound rather than make it. "Gowrie," Poirot said gently. "Oh, you've served the family long. 27 years, sir. Then you must know their rhythms, their habits, their silences." Gowrie offered no response. "I wish to ask you something sensitive. On the night of the murder, did Mr. Delaford request anything unusual?" Gowrie folded his hands. "He asked me to place a letter on Lady Tremain's breakfast tray. He gave it to me sealed. Did she receive it? She did not. The letter was burned. The fire in the morning room had nearly died when we found him, but I saw the edge of an envelope, curled, half consumed. I removed it before the constables arrived." Poirot's eyes became sharper. "Why remove it?" "Because our family is private. Also, it named someone in this residence." Poirot moved a step closer. "Who?" Gowrie paused. "I don't know the entire contents. But her name was Lady Lovell." Poirot's expression didn't change. "You read the envelope?" "The name solely. The remainder was destroyed. I assure you, I have not told anyone else." Poirot made a quick nod. "You have done a bad job at your duty, monsieur. But you've done well with the truth. That will be important before the end." That evening, Poirot dined alone. Hastings was preoccupied with a chat with Lord Pimworth concerning military insignia, and had missed Poirot's departure. In the small private drawing room, Poirot repeated the facts silently, as if arranging flowers in a vase only he could see. Letter was destroyed. A message slid under the door. A poker set designed with an artist's eye, a list of names, each carrying a debt, a secret, or a dread. And now a new name has sprung from the ashes. Lady Lovell. He remembered her poise. Her fast mind. When chatting about Freddie, she was casually nasty. She had not grieved him in the least. She had expected his end. Perhaps, Poirot thought, she had planned for it long before. He rose and moved to the mantelpiece, adjusting the tiny brass figurine, just slightly, just so. Then he turned and muttered to the empty room, "The next move will arrive soon." The following. Morning saw a significant change in weather. Rain hammered against Ashcroft Vale's windows, beating against them like eager fingers. The sky had faded to a faint, listless grey, and the gardens outside, once sharp with frost, had bled into muck and puddles. The house felt closer, the corridors narrower, and the air was charged with something unspoken, anticipation or perhaps the setting weight of fear. Poirot awoke with precision, having scarcely slept. He had been kept awake not by doubt, but by the unpleasant clarity that frequently preceded a mistake, his own or someone else's. Something had changed the night before, not externally, but within the structure of what he was building. He had all of the threads, too many in fact. Some must be red herrings, and there, he thought, was the next step, to follow a thread to its logical dead end, so that it would expose the way beneath. He discovered Hastings in the breakfast area, swirling marmalade into tea with excessive passion. Lord Pimworth stood by the sideboard reading a telegraph, his face grim and unreadable. When Poirot entered, he quickly folded the slip of paper and placed it into his jacket. "A pressing matter, my lord?" Poirot inquired softly. "Business," Pimworth answered. "But I've postponed it." "Lady Tremaine insisted," Poirot nodded. "How considerate." He sat, declined toast, and said nothing more until Pimworth left the room. Then he turned towards Hastings. "Do you remember what Callum Sweeney said?" "That Freddie mocked him about the script. That it would delight him, of course. He said it mockingly, did he?" Poirot's voice was serious. Or was he afraid? Afraid of a script? Poirot leaned in. "You know, Hastings, what if Freddie's script wasn't metaphorical? What if he had truly written something and it contained names, events and truths that people would rather keep hidden? And what if he meant to read it aloud?" Hastings frowned. "You mean like blackmail?" "Not for money. For effect. For power. It's one thing to keep a secret quiet. Say it's another to reveal it in front of people who can't pretend not to know." Poirot stood immediately. "Come, we must speak with Lady Lovell. She's been waiting for us to notice her." They found her in the solarium, where the rain had created twisted patterns on the glass ceiling above. She was alone, dressed in a deep navy velvet robe and fixed her hair with intentional elegance. She did not rise when they entered. "You've been asking about me," she replied without turning. "I have been asking about Freddie Delaford, madame," Poirot stated quietly. "And your name came up in relation to a letter." She turned slowly. "I don't know what he wrote, but he wrote something. Her eyes did not flinch. "We had a history. Years ago. You are aware that I was widowed at a young age." Freddie was young, attractive, and vicious in ways he couldn't fathom. He craved affection like a sponge craves water, yet when it was delivered he recoiled. "You speak as though you pitied him." I did. Until I realized he was dangerous. "Dangerous, madame." She folded her hands. "He used to provoke people, say words he couldn't take back. He once assured Lady Tremaine he would inherit her silence. He used to make jokes about discovering the one secret that would break her. And did he? I do not know. I only know that a week before this party, he sent me a note requesting me to bring my best mask. He indicated he'd be releasing some old theatre, and that I played a role in it." Poirot tilted his head. "You did not think to tell me this before?" "I thought it was more of his nonsense. But now?" She caught his stare, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt appeared on her face. "Now I think he meant it." Poirot thanked her, bowed, and went without saying anything else. Outside the solarium, Hastings said, "She could have done it." "She sounds half proud of how she handled him." "Non, mon ami," Poirot said. "She is proud indeed, but she did not lie. She has only omitted." He entered the corridor that led to the morning chamber, which had been shuttered since the night of the murder. Gowrie appeared softly, holding a key, and opened the door. The fire was out now, and the smell of soot lingered in the corners. Poirot cautiously moved over the bearskin rug to stand where the body had been. He closes his eyes. The letter burned. The poker is placed. The glass spilled precisely so. Everything was too neat. Perhaps the killer was neat. Perhaps the killer was mimicking neatness, making it look like someone else's hand. "Do you see?" Hastings squinted. "No." Poirot turned to face him. "Then let me show you." "Come." They returned to the drawing room, where Lady Tremaine sat reading correspondence with the rigidity of a besieged queen. She stared up at them with dry, inscrutable eyes. "Mr. Poirot," she murmured without emotion, "you look as though you're about to offer me unpleasant news." "Only clarity, madame." "May I ask, did your nephew ever tell you about a script? A piece of writing?" "He told me several things. Most of them are meant to agitate. I ignored them. Yet you still named him your heir." Her voice grew brittle. "Because he was bloody." "I don't believe in sentimental ties beyond lineage." "Then you will appreciate my directness, madame," Poirot said as he stepped forward. "You got a letter from him the morning after he died." "It never reached you. Your butler intercepted it and destroyed it. He claims it named Lady Lovell." Lady Tremaine's hands paused on the edge of a parchment envelope. Then, with the slightest lift of one brow, she asked, "Did it? You knew nothing of it?" "I have numerous suspicions, Monsieur Poirot. I can't afford to be startled." "It is a weakness." Poirot offered a tiny nod. "Forgive me, but I must be thorough." And Hastings went silently away from her. Back in the hallway, Hastings murmured, "You were trying to provoke her." "No, Hastings. I was trying to figure out whether she was lying, and she wasn't." "Then what now?" Before Poirot could respond, Gowrie reappeared. This time he was holding a battered, leather-bound notebook. "I found this," the butler replied, his voice low. "It was concealed inside a drawer in Mr. Delaford's chamber. I assume it belonged to him." Poirot took it with care. He opened the first page. The title, written neatly, was The Final Act, a play with 3 scenes, based on actual conversations, for private performances only. Poirot quickly flipped the page and moved on to the next one. His brows rose. Names. Dialogues, real names, conversations that have only been partially coded, references to debts, to betrayal, to a hidden birth, referring to a falsified signature, to an affair hiding beneath the Tremaine roof, and at the core of it all, one phrase repeated across the margins: "When the laughter stops, the truth will speak." Poirot closed the book carefully. "There it is," he muttered. "The motivation, the warning, and the tragic miscalculation." He turned to Hastings, his eyes gleaming. Freddie Delaford planned to perform this at the party, a staged reading. Everybody would have been present. It was his final joke. But someone read ahead, and the performance finished before it ever started. Hastings appeared pallid. "So who?" Poirot's voice was calm. Now that I know what they feared, mon ami, I know exactly who to ask next. Poirot sat in the conservatory once again, the rain having subsided to a thin mist that fogged the glass, casting the world beyond in a blurry palette of greys. The leather-bound notebook sat open in his lap, his gloved fingers slowly turning. The pages as if they were inspecting petals from a rare orchid, fragile, poisonous, and revealing when pressed. The format of the so-called play was theatrical in form, but undeniably realistic in content. Freddie Delaford had structured the story into 3 acts, with each revealing a secret. The first concerned a forgery of an inheritance document, implying that Lord Pimworth assisted Lady Tremaine in concealing an embarrassing change to her will. The second hinted to a hidden child, born to a young servant years ago and nurtured elsewhere, with hints that someone in the household orchestrated the disappearance. The third and final scene had only one title: The Letter That Was Never Meant to Be Read. The pages were missing. Hastings hovered near Poirot, observing his expression. "Blackmail, then?" he asked quietly. "Not in the traditional sense," Poirot said, without looking up. "Blackmail wants silence. This is theatre, performance, exposure. He wanted the secrets to breathe, to drift into the air like incense, pushing everyone to inhale." He closed the book gently and stood. "Now, mon ami, the psychological game begins." Poirot moved quietly, sending signals to Lady Lovell, Lord Pimworth, and Miss Grantham via Gowrie, requesting that they join him in the music room at staggered intervals. The room had been empty since the night of the party. It was a big room with poor lighting, hazy windows, and a polished piano that hadn't been played in weeks. Poirot stood in the centre, not behind a desk or chair, but facing the entrance, like a maestro ready to conduct. Lady Lovell arrived first. She came with the confidence of a lady used to confrontation, but her gaze shifted just once to the piano. Poirot greeted her with a warm nod. "Thank you for coming, madame. I wanted to share something with you. A piece of writing." He held out the notebook. She did not accept it, but peered down at the open page. "You recognize it, of course. I've never seen that before," she remarked softly. "Yet your name is in it." She did not blink. "I have no doubt. Freddie never knew how to hold his pen. Still, would you like to know what he wrote about you?" "No. But you already know, right?" He planned on reading it aloud. "Before all the guests." She was silent. Poirot lowered his voice. "You feared that, madame. More than most. Because secrets, kept behind painted doors, remain secrets. Exposure alters everything. Are you accusing me?" she questioned, her voice calm and crisp. "Not yet. I only have one question for you. Did you chat with him privately on the night he died?" She paused, then offered a tiny nod. "Yes, he cornered me on the side stairwell. He promised me a starring role in his production." "What did you say?" "I told him he'd regret it." Poirot's voice became quite quiet. "And then?" "I left him. I went into my room. I poured a beverage. Alone. No witness. None." Poirot tilted his head. "Thank you, madame." She dashed away, her steps clipped, like someone fleeing from a stage before the curtain collapsed. Miss Grantham was next. She appeared pale and wan, as if the grey sky had drained the colour from her cheeks. She stood near the piano, wondering where to place her hands. "You requested me?" Poirot nodded. "Oui. I have a question for you, mademoiselle." "About the letter Freddie gave to the butler." She flinched. "I don't know what it said. But you were supposed to. Although it was addressed to Lady Tremaine, the contents were of interest to you. You were named in the notebook as the topic of an unsolved matter." Her throat clenched. "He said he'd inform them. About me. About something. I used to—" She paused, trembling. Poirot was being nice now. "Tell me what happened," she swallowed. "He stated he had copies of the letters I wrote to him. You are foolish, young people. He stated if I didn't go to the party, he'd mail them to Lady Tremaine. I didn't even believe he still had them. But you came anyway. He said if I stood with him during the reading, he'd absolve me. His word." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "And did you believe him?" "I wasn't sure what to trust. I thought perhaps if I kept close I could stop him." Stop him how? She stared at him with alarm. Not like that. But the idea crossed your mind? Her eyes filled. I wanted him to remain silent. That is all. Poirot did not press further. She walked away as if she were trying to get away from herself. Lord Pimworth entered last. He was brisk and defensive, with his jaw tightened. I'm not going to sit here and be accused. Sit or stand as you like, my lord, Poirot answered quietly. Tell me, did you know about the notebook? I thought he was penning something. He always carried a diary. But I did not read it. Yet you're in it, as part of a questionable legal arrangement involving Lady Tremain's estate. Did you forge a document? Pimworth's eyes flashed. That's absurd. Did you witness one you should not have? I was acting in her interest. Poirot's gaze hardened. Ah, so you did intervene. You knew Freddie had written it down. Has he threatened you? He hinted. He preferred power. He didn't have any of his own, so he borrowed them through scandal. Did you confront him that night? Pimworth paused. Yes. I informed him if he continued with his reading, I would reveal his debts. He'd be humiliated. And did he laugh? Yes. Poirot nodded slowly. Then he signed his own death warrant. Pimworth looked away. I didn't kill him, if that's your next question. No, my lord. That isn't my next question. Pimworth did not ask what was. He left stiffly. When they were gone, Poirot stood alone for some time, then turned to Hastings, who had remained in the corner throughout, observing silently. They are unraveling, Hastings added. All of them. As expected. When one tugs a single thread, the seams begin to gape. But have you noticed what they share, Hastings? None of them is in a panic. Neither of them were surprised. You mean they all knew about the notebook? Or at the very least it existed. And it was dangerous. Then who killed him? Poirot smiled weakly. We're not quite there yet, but soon. There is one more guest who has yet to answer a question he is unaware has been posed. Who? Poirot turned. Towards the stairs. The one who watches, who listens, and who knew where Freddie kept his words? Hastings stiffened. The butler? No, Hastings. Gowrie found the journal. However, he did not burn the pages from the final scene. Someone else did. Someone came into Freddie's room the night before. Someone who was familiar with the hiding place. Someone who was not invited to perform, but read ahead anyhow. Poirot. I moved to the door, the rain becoming a light mist behind him. And that someone, he continued softly, has just made their first real mistake. It was just before noon when the second jolt rippled through Ashcroft Vale, not with a scream this time, but with a cry of panic so shrill and abrupt that it reverberated down the passage like a struck bell. Poirot, almost halfway up the main staircase, paused at the sound. Hastings, a step behind him, turned on his heel. They discovered Gowrie in the west corridor outside the guest rooms, one palm braced against the paneling, his eyes wide and mouth half-formed into a word he couldn't quite speak. A shattered porcelain teacup lay at his feet, with thin blue china shards spread like fangs across the carpet. In there, Gowrie said, referring to the half-open door. Poirot pushed it open gently. It was Lady Tremain's private dressing room. Inside, mayhem had blossomed. The lacquered vanities drawers were pulled open and emptied, leaving a disorderly tangle of silk scarves, envelopes, and errant gloves on the floor. A small jewelry box had been cracked open, leaving the velvet-lined compartments exposed and bare. A decanter of sherry had been tipped over onto the desk, leaking into a stack of writing paper. Poirot, however, was drawn to the fireplace. Someone had tried to fire it, but it only caught enough to leave a blackened heap of half-burnt parchment. The pages were still curling with smoke, having been fed in haste, the flames smothered in the process. Poirot stepped forward and extracted one still warm scrap from the center with the end of his pocket-knife. He studied it intently, his jaws clenching. A line from Delaford's notebook could be seen through the ash smudges. He read aloud, low and clear, Act 3. The letter that was never meant to be read. Characters include the widow, the soldier, and the girl who watches. Poirot stood slowly. Mon Dieu, he muttered. They tried to burn the final scene again. Hastings paled. But why not before? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Because the initial attempt failed, Freddy concealed this section separately from the notebook. Whoever discovered the main volume believed they had eliminated the entire threat. But now, someone has realized there was more. And they came back to finish the job. Poirot looked at Gowrie. Who discovered this room in such a state? I did it, sir. I was carrying her normal post-lunch cordial. She was not in her chambers. I found this instead. Who was last seen near this part of the house? I don't know, sir. Most of the guests were downstairs. I believe Miss Grantham went to lie down. Mr. Sweeney was reading at the library. And Lady Tremaine herself? Gowrie shook his head. She went for a walk around the east lawn. As usual, she wore a heavy cloak. Poirot turned back to the fire. He investigated the ash pile further. He pried loose a corner of parchment that had been flattened under something. Only one word survives, scrawled boldly, inheritance. He clutched it between his gloved fingers like a bone from an ancient tomb. Then he turned towards Hastings. Mon ami, it has escalated. The game is no longer about concealment, but about erasure. This is not only an attempt to silence the deceased, it's a war against what he left behind. They exited the room in silence. Outside, the mist had turned to rain. The halls of Ashcroft Vale reverberated with hushed conversations, and footfall stopped abruptly. Poirot made no announcements. He issued no orders. Instead, he returned to the conservatory, where the light was dim, and sent a message to Gowrie requesting a gathering in the blue drawing room. All guests, no exclusions, 10 minutes. H. Poirot. They arrived one by one. Lady Tremaine appeared last, her eyes flinty beneath her hooded cloak. She didn't inquire why they were summoned. She merely sat. Poirot remained standing, his silhouette, highlighted by the French windows behind him. Mesdames and messieurs, he said softly, you've all been really gracious throughout this investigation. But today, this afternoon, I must address you as individuals in a closed setting, rather than as visitors or mourners, because the room is now closed, not by walls or doors, but by the truth. And it presses inward, he pointed to the hearth. This morning someone attempted to delete some evidence, not in panic but in strategy. Pages from Mr. Delaford's last scene. This was the second such effort. The first was only partially successful, while the second was hastily executed. Interrupted. And that interruption teaches us a lot. The room had become silent. Even Lady Lovell's ever-moving fingers were gripped fast in her lap. 3 people were mentioned in the missing scene: the widow, the soldier, and the girl who watches. A theatrical flourish indeed. However, it remains distinct. The widow's name is Lady Lovell. The soldier is Lord Pimworth. And the girl who is watching. He turned slowly to Miss Grantham. Is you? Her face turned to paper white. I don't know what that means. Poirot was kind. I believe you don't, but I guess someone assumed you may. Someone was concerned about what the closing scene would reveal if read aloud, which suggests that someone had already read it. He moved closer to the center of the room. Now notice. The first burn happened in the morning room. The fire was practically extinguished. It happened before the cry, before the body was discovered. Someone went in with a purpose, located the notebook, and burned what they believed was the most damning. But they were mistaken. The final scene had been removed, hidden elsewhere. He let it hang. And this morning another effort was made. But who, my friends, had the opportunity? The guests, who were distributed throughout the house, were mostly accounted for. The scene was discovered by someone other than the butler. But someone who moves freely, has access to all chambers, and no longer considers themselves a suspect. His gaze fixed across the room. Mr. Callum Sweeney. The playwright blinked. Me? That is ludicrous. Why on earth would I— You were the only person who knew how Delaford thought, the only one who understood his theatrical structure and codes. The poker scene was faked, like a scene from one of your plays. You stated it yourself. He was teasing you with it. It was dubbed a script. Promise to show. Poirot stepped forwards. You were once his rival, but more than that, you were his audience. You knew what he was about to reveal. You knew it before everyone else, and you visited his room the night before the murder. You found the notebook. You took it. I didn't. You burned some of it in the morning room, then you set the stage. You poured some brandy. You placed the poker. You made it appear like something someone else would do, someone dramatic and angry. You even created your own alibi by reporting the fight you overheard. But it didn't happen, right? You created it. Sweeney stood there trembling. He was going to ruin everyone. He didn't care what followed next. He was a parasite. Poirot's voice lowered. And yet you wrote the final lines. Lady Tremaine sat forward. Is this true? Sweeney turned to face her. He'd have exposed everything. Your will. You forged an amendment. Your disgrace. Poirot's voice was suddenly quiet. And you feared being left out of the story. You worried being the only person Delaford had nothing on, so you made yourself the author of his death. Sweeney's shoulders slumped. I burnt everything I could. I thought I had destroyed it all. Poirot nodded. But you didn't. And that, monsieur, is why the truth continues to speak. He stepped aside as the rain returned in earnest, pattering like clapping against the glass. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, not yet. There was a long pause in the drawing room after Poirot spoke, not a stillness of confusion or unbelief, but of collective breath-holding, as if the house itself braced for a sound that never arrived. Outside, the rain spoke against the big windows, insistent and unwavering, as if it, too, wanted to hear what would happen next. Callum Sweeney had not spoken. Again. He stood transfixed in the center of the room, the firelight reflecting the wet sheen of sweat on his temple. Lady Tremaine's eyes narrowed, and her hands were so tightly clutched that veins could be seen through her pale skin. Miss Grantham, they sat motionless, almost frightened to move, and Lord Pimworth shifted just once, a quiver in his right jaw, before resuming the military stiffness that concealed his discomfort. Lady Lovell, for her part, did not glance at Sweeney, instead focusing on Poirot as if the next moment rested on the man who had named him rather than the accused himself. But Poirot, methodical as ever, adjusted his cuffs, made 2 short steps toward the hearth, and addressed the room rather than Sweeney directly. Yet, he murmured, what Monsieur Sweeney did not know, what none of you knew, was that the final truth did not lie in the notebook. He left the phrase hanging like fog in the air. Hastings blinked alongside him. I thought that was the final truth. Poirot cast a peek at his pal. No, Hastings. That was just the frame. The canvas stayed hidden. Until now. He gently turned to face Lady Tremaine. Madame, may I ask for the small enamel box you keep in the lower drawer of your writing desk? It's oval, decorated with lilies, and lockable. Her eyes narrowed into slits. You've been in my rooms. Briefly, I observed. I didn't open, but I knew it would be there. There was a pause. Lady Tremaine then stood with almost dramatic accuracy, moved past every sight in the room, and vanished into the corridor. When she returned, she held the box in one hand, her movements controlled and her eyes cold. She handed it to Poirot without saying a word. He opened it gingerly. Inside, behind a silk handkerchief, were 2 sheets of onion skin paper, folded in thirds. He removed them carefully and held them up to the light. The original copy of the letter Freddie Delaford wrote, he recalled. Not the version that burned in the fireplace. This one was not sent. He stared at Sweeney and then at Lady Tremaine. You intercepted it before Gowrie could deliver it. She tilted her head just once. Hastings stepped forward, perplexed. But I thought the butler destroyed it. Poirot shakes his head. Gowrie burned a decoy, a planted envelope. The actual letter, this, was taken from Delaford's room the night he died. Lady Tremaine must have known where he hid important things. She took it not to protect herself, but someone else. He looked at her. She did not blink. I took it to protect the estate, the family. Name, nothing more. Poirot nodded once and began to read. Dear Aunt, you once told me the greatest weakness in any bloodline is silence. So I've written it down. Everything I know, everything I've been told, every whisper and scandal they thought I couldn't. Here. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do expect reckoning. When the laughter stops, they will listen. And you, above all, will have to decide what to do with what I've left behind. Start with the will. Then the certificate in the envelope marked R, and finally ask Lady Lovell what she did for you in Vienna. Poirot looked up. Vienna, he repeated softly. There it is, the hidden clue. Lady Lovell's face changed, not visibly, not violently, but in a way Poirot saw all the same. A stillness behind the eyes, a stiffening of breath. Poirot continued. Freddy was going to name you, madame. You were not just an old family friend. You were once his mother's companion abroad. And more than that, years ago, you arranged something for Lady Tremaine, something involving a child, not hers but one connected to the family line. Lady Lovell's voice was sharp. You have no proof. No, Poirot replied evenly. But Delaford did. The certificate he mentions, the one marked R, refers to a birth registration in Vienna dated 32 years ago. A child born to a young Englishwoman under a false name, who returned home weeks later with no child and no explanation. The child was raised quietly elsewhere, his parentage never acknowledged. But he grew up clever, charming, resourceful. He turned to Hastings, and his name was Freddy Delaford. The silence was complete. Lady Tremaine looked down. Yes, she said. It's true. Poirot let the words sink. He was your son. She gave the smallest of nods. My mistake. My shame. He was the result of something I never wanted to remember. But I couldn't raise him here. Not then. My husband would have disinherited me. I sent him to a cousin. I visited once or twice under pretenses, and he never knew. Oh, he knew, she said bitterly. He knew. He never stopped reminding me. And when he came of age, he demanded a place in my will. I gave it to him. He threatened worse. If I didn't. Poirot's voice was calm. And the notebook, the final scene. She closed her eyes. He said he would expose everything. I told him if he did, I would remove him again. This time, publicly. Poirot turned. So you see, Hastings, the person with the greatest motive was not the playwright, nor the heir, nor the scorned admirer. He pointed to the letter. It was a secret written by the dead, addressed to the woman who tried for decades to forget the truth of him, and now it lies here in words that cannot be undone. Callum Sweeney stepped forward. I didn't kill him. I staged the room. I thought it would scare him, embarrass him. I hated him, but I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded. I believe you. Lady Tremaine's eyes narrowed. Then who did? Poirot turned to the last figure, in the room who had not spoken since they entered. Lord Pimworth. My lord, he said, you were the only one who had both the opportunity and the knowledge. You were once in love with Lady Tremaine. You knew about Freddy. You knew he wasn't just a nuisance. He was an heir who could unseat your family's legacy. You found the envelope marked R. You burned part of the notebook, but when you realized the final pages were hidden elsewhere, Pimworth stood slowly. I didn't intend to kill him. No, Poirot said. You meant to frighten him, to silence him, but he mocked you, laughed at you, and in that moment you struck. Pimworth exhaled deeply. He had ruined so many. I thought it was justice. Poirot looked at him. It was not yours to give. No one spoke as Pimworth sank into the nearest chair. He did not deny it. Poirot turned back to the fire, as though the whole affair had played out before him on its hearth. People do not kill for secrets, he stated quietly. They kill to prevent secrets from becoming public. Noise, laughter, memory. Freddy knew this. This was his final scene. He included them all in the play. He then discreetly closed the letter. Nobody moved. Lord Pimworth remained sitting, shoulders hunched, his gaze concentrated not on Poirot or the fire, but on the floor in front of him, as if something there may clear him, something in the grain of the wood, the direction of the ash. Lady Tremaine had not spoken again. Her chin was raised, but her demeanor was brittle, as if the slightest mention of her son's name could break her spine. Callum Sweeney, who was still standing near the hearth, turned away, as if he were afraid of the heat. Miss Grantham had turned, pale, one hand pressed to her collarbone as if holding something inside. Lady Lovell remained motionless, her eyes inscrutable behind the mask she had long ago mastered. Poirot stood alone in the middle of the drawing-room, as if on stage. However, There was no more performance to give, only a revelation. Even so, there was less spectacle and more silence. Everything I have said, he continued at last, has pointed to the reason, the motive, and the layers of deception that enabled this crime. But it's not just what happened, mesdames and messieurs. It's why it happened just now. That's the finishing detail. The one you all overlooked. He took hesitant steps forward. Freddie Delaford was a man with many faults. He manipulated, definitely. He threatened. He taunted people with half-spoken truths, as if a child were dangling string in front of a cat. But he wasn't careless, not in the end. He did not decide to perform his play that night on a whim. Poirot turned to face Lady Tremaine. He chose your birthday. Not in celebration, but as a message. He intended to reveal himself, to you and everyone else, as your son, rather than your heir. Lady Tremaine said nothing. Poirot continued, his voice calm but precise. He timed it exactly. The letter, the notepad, the staging of the scene. It was dramatic, yes, but also systematic. He intended to read Act 3 during the final toast, right before the dessert was brought in. That explains why the pages were hidden in your dressing room. He had placed them there earlier in the day. He never intended to read them directly from the notebook. That was a decoy. He turned to face Pimworth again. But somebody else knew or guessed. You, my lord, had already seen too much. You knew he was hiding something. You dreaded it. Because if it came out, what you had done, what you had helped Lady Tremaine hide, the ramifications would go beyond scandal. The will may be disputed. The estate is being challenged. You might lose everything you've safeguarded, Pimworth said. Nothing but gave a tiny empty nod. Poirot moved on. So you waited till the others became distracted. You entered the morning chamber. You confronted him. Maybe you gave a final warning. Maybe he laughed again. And then you struck. He paused. But not hard enough to kill him immediately. The room shifted. Hastings straightened slightly. Poirot's tone remained unchanged. He fell, but he was not dead. Not right away. He groped for the hearth. He attempted to pull himself up. The poker landed near him. The brandy spilled. Poirot observed the group and speculated on whether he attempted to talk. And then, someone else entered. Miss Grantham made the faintest sound, a short inhalation of breath. Poirot didn't glance at her. They saw him, bleeding and dazed. They spotted an opportunity. He walked gently towards the flames. The initial strike didn't kill him, but the second did. A precise blow, almost clinical. And there, mon ami Hastings, was the detail I could not explain, until I found the second set of prints on the handle. Smaller, gloved, but pressed differently, from a different angle. Poirot finally turned to Lady Lovell. She didn't flinch. You finished what Pimworth began. There was quiet. Then Lady Lovell spoke, her voice cold and clear. I knew he was alive. Nobody else breathed. I found him gasping and muttering something as he attempted to pull himself up. And I knew what he was going to say. He'd ruin everything. He would expose Lady Tremaine. He'd drag us through. The muck of his bitterness. He had no rights. She stared at Poirot. So I gave him mercy. Poirot didn't move. It was not mercy. No, she inquired. Then what was it? Control. That silenced her. Yes, Poirot replied kindly. Madame, you've always controlled what people know, what they hear, what they remember. You were his mother's companion, his godmother by name and his keeper in many ways. But he slipped from your grasp, so you finally silenced him. With one act. He looked at Pimworth again. And you, my lord, did not speak because you knew what would happen. The second blow did not belong to you. It belonged to someone who has always finished the work others could not. Lady Lovell walked forward. Then charge me, Monsieur Poirot. Have the constables come. Do what you must. Poirot stared at her for a long time. I do not bring charges, madame. I bring light. She did not respond. Finally, he turned to face Lady Tremaine. You've lost a son. Twice. Her expression didn't change. He selected the distance, not I. Poirot offered a little bow. Even so. It is finished. She tilted her head. Then I shall speak to the solicitor." He nodded once. It was over. They left the room one by one. Pimworth remained silent. Grantham is in tears. Sweeney remained mute, retiring into whatever was left of himself. Lady Lovell didn't glance back. Only Hastings remained. He looked at Poirot for a long time before speaking. "You knew." "Long before today." Poirot tilted his head. "Not new, Hastings. Suspected. I needed the final clue. The ashes, the second fire, the missing certificate. But certainly the pattern began to form. And yet you allowed them to talk, one by one." Poirot's eyes remained serene. "Because guilt reveals itself best when it does not know it is seen." They stood silently as the fire on the hearth crackled softly, with embers still throbbing. Outside, the rain had ceased. Only a quiet remained. The silence that ensued was not peaceful. Even as the drawing-room emptied and the echoes of footfall receded into the long halls of Ashcroft Vale, Poirot stayed near the hearth, his hands softly clasped behind his back, his head bowed just slightly as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. The fire had reduced to ashes now, with red coils pulsing faintly, like the final heartbeat of something that had burnt too fiercely and quick. Hastings observed him without speaking. He'd known Poirot long enough to identify this stillness as one of precision rather than contemplation. Poirot's mind, despite now having the complete image, was not finished with the case. Not until he had knotted every thread, fastened every dangling truth and identified the guilty, not only by conduct, but by intention. Poirot finally turned and walked quietly to the settee where Hastings waited. He sat, carefully removing a small fleck of ash from his cuff, and then began, not as if he were explaining, but as if he were concluding a letter he had already drafted. "There were 3 crimes in this case, Hastings," he replied quietly. "One of blood, one of silence, and one of fire." Hastings leaned forwards. "The murder, the concealment of the birth, and the destruction of the letter." Poirot nodded once. "More crucially, 3 participants, and each committed only a portion of the total. That, I believe, is what made it tough to see. They didn't act collectively, but they did react in order. Like falling dominoes." He held up 3 fingers. "Lord Pimworth dealt the initial blow. Fear drives motivation, rage, desperation." He lowered one. "Lady Lovell delivered the second and fatal blow. Legacy inspires me. Control. The preservation of an illusion." Another finger lowered. Lady Tremaine committed the last deed, concealing the letter, the truth, and, most importantly, her own shame. She didn't kill him, but she let the falsehood about his unworthiness to continue. To be inherited alongside everything else in this house. He said it without bitterness, only clarity. It was not a single crime, Hastings. It was 3 people who allowed a man to die so that their pasts may be preserved. Hastings exhaled. "You'll tell the authorities?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "I'll tell them what I must. But, mon ami, there is a distinction between justice and drama, and I will not take part in another performance." They sat silently for a moment. Then Poirot arose. "Come," he instructed. "There is one last thing I must do." They climbed the main staircase slowly, the house unnaturally still. At the end of the corridor, the door of Delaford's chamber was ajar, the thick, dark wood creaking as they opened it. The chamber had remained undisturbed since Poirot's first visit. The writing desk, the bed, the naked coals in the fireplace, everything stayed in that calm state between presence and absence. Poirot moved to the desk. He took the notebook out of the drawer again, the one Delaford had written, and Sweeney had attempted to burn. He proceeded to the final entry, the last full page, which was written in a tidy, compact paragraph rather than theatrical fashion. "I know what they will say," Poirot read aloud. "That I am arrogant, vindictive, that I intended to embarrass them. But they forget. I was created in silence, raised in the shadows. I became a man alone, not because I was unloved, but because I went unidentified. This is not vengeance, it is recognition. If my life was a lie, I'll make them live the truth." Poirot closed the book. "He was not a kind man," Hastings said quietly. "No," Poirot responded. "But he was not a liar. They exited the room in silence. Poirot didn't lock the door. Downstairs, the atmosphere had altered. A carriage had arrived outside, and a murmur of voices could be heard from the foyer. Constables, restrained and respectful. Gowrie spoke to them with a quiet that suggested he had been awaiting them all morning. Poirot did not intervene. He turned instead to the eastern hallway, where Lady Tremain's private parlour awaited. She was already there, seated in the same high-backed chair, her expression unreadable, and her posture as straight as when he first arrived. She only looked up when Poirot entered. "I imagine the police are here," she said. "They are. And what will you tell them?" Poirot approached the hearth and paused, his hands clasped gently. The man died from a strike to the head. The scene was disturbed. The guests were questioned. That one of them confessed. "Which one? Which one would you prefer it be?" Her lips curved slightly. "Very clever of you, Monsieur Poirot, but I don't play games." "No," he replied. "You simply host them." A significant pause occurred between them. She then questioned, "Do you think he hated me?" Poirot shakes his head. "No, I believe he needed you to see him. When you refused, he forced your eyes open." Lady Tremaine did not respond. Her hands folded in her lap slowly. "I've lost so many things in this house," she finally confessed. "My youth, my husband, my place in the world. Losing a son, even one I never claimed, is the most unusual absence of all." Poirot gave a slight bow. "Then I shall leave you to grieve, in peace." He turned to leave. She said, "Poirot." Just as he crossed the threshold, he paused. Did he suffer? Poirot gave her a long, even gaze. "No," he replied, "not after the second blow." She nodded once. It was the first time he had seen her blink. When Poirot returned to the foyer, Hastings was already waiting near the coat rack. The constables had entered but lingered respectfully, speaking with Gowrie in hushed tones. Nobody has yet moved toward the drawing-room. Lady Lovell had disappeared. Pimworth was likely pacing in one of the cold outer halls, as if searching for the man he used to be. "Ready?" Hastings asked. Poirot took the hat and gloves. "Quite." As they stepped out into the grey afternoon, Hastings glanced back at the house. "You didn't name her," he said. "No," Poirot muttered. "Some truths, Hastings, are too heavy to be carried by men in uniform." They reached the car. The driver started the engine. Poirot settled back into the seat, gazing through the fogged window as Ashcroft Vale began to disappear behind them. First the gateposts, then the hedgerows, and finally the dark roof lines, fading like the last notes of an overture that had ended long before the audience realized. When the laughter stopped, Poirot said softly, "The play began." And then he closed his eyes. The letter arrived 3 weeks later at Poirot's London residence on a drab January morning, as the fog hung low over the Thames and the fireplace crackled with a faint whisper of cold, dampened logs. Hastings had just stepped in from a walk, stamping the wet from his shoes, when Poirot opened the envelope with the same delicacy he might have afforded a hand-painted orchid. He read it once, then twice, and said nothing for a full minute. Hastings watched, him uncertain. "Bad news." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, mon ami, only a closing act. The letter was from Gowrie, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Tremaine passed peacefully in her sleep last evening. The doctor attributes it to her heart. There will be no formal inquest. She left no confession, only a short note to the family solicitor. The estate is to be sold, and the proceeds divided evenly among 3 charitable institutions, one for foundlings, one for war widows, and one for the arts. Miss Grantham has left for Florence. Lord Pimworth remains at the ancestral home in Sussex. Mr. Sweeney returned to London, and has taken residence in a boarding house near the West End. Lady Lovell has retired to a quiet estate in Devon. None have spoken publicly. All, I believe, would prefer silence to vindication. She asked me to thank you for treating the truth with the dignity she could not. Respectfully, Gowrie Poirot folded the letter slowly and placed it beside the Morning Post. His gaze wandered toward the window, where the mist blurred the edge of the rooftops and made even the familiar city seem uncertain in its outline. "She knew," Hastings said quietly. "She knew what she'd done. Even if she didn't wield the poker, she held the match. Poirot nodded almost imperceptibly. Oui, and that is why she left no defense. Her silence was not defiance, it was her final surrender. There was a long pause. Hastings poured them both a cup of coffee. The fire hissed gently. I still can't decide, Hastings said after a while. Was it justice, in the end? Poirot did not respond quickly. He turned the coffee cup in his hands, then looked up, his eyes clear, unreadable. There are kinds of justice, Hastings. The law, yes, but also reckoning, recognition. And sometimes justice is not in the punishment of the guilty, but in the breaking of the pattern. The truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. That is what the boy wanted. To be seen. And in the end, they all were. Hastings glanced again at the folded letter. And you? Are you satisfied? Poirot smiled faintly, smoothing a wrinkle in his cuff. I am never satisfied, mon ami, I am only correct. They sat in silence after that, two men wrapped in quiet, the fire flickering, the fog unmoving. Somewhere beyond the window, a bell rang out the hour, and with it the final echo of Ashcroft Vale faded into history. Its laughter ended, its secrets spent, its story, at last, complete.